Everybody, we're back for the next video. Moving to the fifth slide, we're looking at John the Baptist. All four Gospels have the story of John the Baptist and how he baptizes Jesus. Now, this is weird because people think, like, what? I thought baptism was to remove sins. Why is this a thing? Why did Jesus have to get baptized if, as tradition has it, Jesus didn't sin? So this idea is not about washing away sin. It's about starting a new life with God. It's about starting a new life with the community. And it's about his new beginning, the new life in his ministry. There's also a interesting story after that about the temptation of Jesus, where Jesus goes out into the desert and he's tempted by Satan, which means adversary. And um, it it Jesus has to struggle against three major temptations, and these are, scholars say, the three temptations of humanity. Physical sustenance. The devil says, "Hey, turn these loaves of bread, or turn these stones into loaves of bread," because Jesus had been out in the desert for 40 days and 40 nights. So, tempting the materialistic part of humanity, and Jesus is able to fight off all three of these. So, there's that. The second one is he takes him up on um, the top of the temple and dares Jesus to throw himself down. Like, you can't do it. You're yellow, right? Like, there's this sense of like daring Jesus. Like, you think you're so good. Like, let's see. I don't think you are. So, and Jesus is able to, like, whatever, and he blows that off, and he doesn't take the bait. And lastly, Satan takes him up on a high mountain and shows him all the kingdoms of the world, and says, "Hey, you can have all of this if you just bow down to me." And this is the sin of power, right? Our attraction and desire for power and control, and that's what is being offered. So these three things, number one, speak to us about our ability to fight off these temptations, but it also speaks to Jesus's humanity. The Gospels want us to see Jesus as one of us. That's a big deal. It really separates this religion from so many of the other religions, is that this religion deals with a God who knows what we're going through because Jesus did. So as we move on, we see that we moved Jesus into his ministry, and really it's kind of involved in three different things. It's the miracles, what he preaches, and parables. Okay, so dealing with miracles, there are a bunch of different miracles. I have them listed there, um, with the wedding feast of Cana and the different. There are a bunch of different kinds of things, where Jesus does a lot of curing of the different physical problems that he has. He also is dealing with things like, um, the wind and the waves, where he's dealing with nature. So he controls nature in some of these incidences. He cures people. Oftentimes, though, when he's curing people, it's not really about the actual physical cure. It's about the faith that comes along with it. Somebody, he's often when somebody's brought to him and they're diseased, or they need some kind of cure, he forgives their sin first, right? Because that is the primary focus of Jesus, is the faith of the person. He often will use the phrase, "Your faith has healed you." Um, Also, you have situations that are really unique, like the 500. So he's preaching to 5,000 people, or at least 5,000 men. That's not counting the women and children. So a lot more. And it's late in the day, and the disciples come to him and like, "Hey, are we gonna send these people home so they can get something to eat?" And he's like, "Hey, feed them yourself." And it's like, "Well, no, we only have like, 5 loaves and 2 fish. Well, how was that gonna happen?" And he's like, "Pass it out anyway." And so they say, "Okay," and they start passing it out, and soon everybody is eating because the fish and the bread multiply, and it's all passed out to everyone, and so everybody eats, and so that is a really fascinating story, and some people are, skeptical of a lot of these things. They say, "Well, these things didn't happen," or whatever, and And I think and I think that it's not the most essential thing to really believing in Christianity, because most of these were just to get the attention of the people around Jesus to start to believe in his way of thinking. So it was kind of like, hey, just getting your attention. But in some senses, some people want to believe and have to believe in the historicity of these miracles. There's been all kinds of different thoughts about this. He cures possessed people possessed by demons. Where they're spazzing out, and you wonder. They didn't really have a good understanding of medical diseases and stuff like that. But could one imagine that it was somebody had a seizure? I've been around my sister-in-law who had seizures, and we were there for her first one, and it scared the heck out of us. And I mean, and I knew what it was, right? Imagine somebody, if you didn't know what seizures were and somebody had one, you would say that they lost control of who they were, and that sounds a lot like possession, right? So, is it possible that some of these things were not as they seemed because of the knowledge or lack thereof of the people of that time? The thing like the feeding of the 5,000 has been explained as like um, people all had food, but they were going to see what they could get out of Jesus. And so they waited, and held on to their food back in their bags and didn't bring it out to see if they could get something for free. And then when they saw Jesus sharing, suddenly everybody started sharing. And that, in some senses, is a miracle in and of itself. Um, Jesus at some point at the toward the end of his preaching, raises Lazarus from the dead, raises a man from the dead, and that's a pretty significant miracle. So these miracles are kind of signs pointing toward who he was and convincing the people to pay attention. The next thing that I want to talk about are um, the messages of Jesus. And there's no greater message um, than the Sermon on the Mount, right? Now, so the Sermon on the Mount is this big long speech that's in both Matthew and Luke, but yet in both of these Gospels, it's a little different. In Matthew, it is called the Sermon on the Mount. In Luke, it's called the Sermon on the Plain. And the reason for the difference here is that in Matthew, you have Jesus up on a hillside, up on the mountain, giving a list of rules and ways of living to the people below, which sounds a heck of a lot like Moses, right? Bringing the Ten Commandments down from Mount Sinai and giving the law to the people. So this is a perfect replica of the Moses story, where Luke has Jesus telling this story, talking to the people on the plain. So Jesus is on the same level as the people, right? And Jesus is, speaking to the poor and the outcast. And that is what is going on there. So you have just by the setting, each of these gospel writers is speaking to the people, is speaking to the actual theme of their gospel. And in the next one, we'll talk about the contents of that, the heart and soul of Jesus's message.